Welcome to a very quick tutorial in how to use perfect culling. The very first step is to add a perfect culling camera script to your camera. After you have done that, select perfect culling in the menu and select new volume. The volume you want to try to position and scale in such a way that it includes your playable area. For me, it probably would look something like that, and you notice I excluded a bunch of the external buildings. The reason for that is that the bounds really only describe to the asset where it should sample. It does not have any other implications for the culling to take place. It really just tells the asset where it should sample, and you want it to sample in the playable area because that's where it matters the most. If you press visualization on the volume, you can actually, if you move your camera in a bit, see all the spheres and the grid, and that also shows you where the asset would sample from. And one sanity check I usually do is I move my camera below the map and I make sure that no sampling point sneaks below the map, because the pixel perfect nature of the asset would mean that if you sample from this place, almost the entire level would be considered visible, and you don't want that to happen, so definitely double check that. Okay, so the next step is to add all the renderers you want to be involved in your occlusion. So press Open Renderer Selection Tool. It opens a window, and you can really just select the parent object of your renderers, because it will automatically pull in all the child objects. Add selected renderers, and we just added 402 renderers. We will have another look at our stats. We got 192 cells, and the sampling time should be almost instant. The 192 cells might be very insufficient for a level of this size, but we will try it anyway just to see what we get. So hit bake on the volume, save an actual asset for the occlusion data. I just call it level 1 and press save, and I save the scene as well to take into account all my changes. Okay, so the bake finished, and now we can just hit play. And what we noticed immediately is that all the transparent objects, or all the objects behind the transparent fence, did disappear. Well, there seems to be some sort of transparency issue, and I will show you how to debug and fix that in a moment. Let's just look into the other direction. And what we notice is that there's also some issues here, and overall you could say the asset works, but it might be working a bit too well. It's removing a bunch of the level that we actually care about, so let's dive into why that is happening. If we go back into our scene and we select the camera, we got an option called Align with Closest Grid Cell, and we press that. This automatically snaps the camera into the closest position where a sampling was taken from. If we now go to the game view again, we see it looks a lot better. Still is some transparency issue it seems, but other than that this is much closer to what we would expect. Let's have a look at the volume as well. There's some helpful options here. We already tried the visualization step before, and we click it again, and what we notice is that now you also got this cube here. In play mode it can show you where the camera is located at and what cell is currently being used. And what you notice is that the cell is massive. For a level of this size it's probably not going to work, but there's some ways how we could potentially make it work anyway. So if we go back to the camera script and you have a look at the very first entry here, it's called Include Neighbor Cell Radius. What that option can be can do for you is it will simply take into account the cell where the camera is currently located and a couple of cells next to it. So for instance, that cell would be included, that cell would be included, and I guess you get the idea. It basically takes into account the neighbor cells. So let's try that. And now go back to the game view and fly around again. And what you notice is it looks a lot better. So that did help a lot. We still have our transparency issue though. So let's see how we can debug that. So one good way to do it is select the volume, and at the bottom we got the option to replace all the materials in the scene with a bake color material. This will look super fancy now, but yeah, that's how the asset is seeing your world. And what you would probably say is that you actually agree with the asset, that the stuff behind the fence shouldn't be visible, because obviously we cannot see it ourselves. This is actually a setup I made just to demonstrate how to use some of the debugging tools. I disabled transparency for that one, and an easy way to fix that is go into the project, find the perfect culling settings scriptable object, and enable transparency again. Now if we go to our volume, we could rebake. But I want to show you also another thing you can do, because the step we just did with the camera to include the neighbor cell, that one actually has a tiny runtime implication, because it needs to look it up at runtime, of course. You can actually bake that in, and it will be even more precise because it takes into account all the neighbor cells. When you do it in the camera, it will only include some of the neighbor cells. If you bake it in, it will include all the neighbor cells. Let's try that option now instead and hit bake. Now that we have done all of that, we should have some pretty good occlusion data, which of course is pretty relative because yeah, we still baked with some pretty insane low amount of cells. But yeah, what we notice is transparency is good. As you can see, no problems here, no problems there, and I don't see any popping anymore. So we might actually be able to get away with that baking setting for a level like that. Of course, there's still one downside that I want to bring up to you, because if you look at the camera, you also got the stats, and if your bake is not precise enough, or you have to merge too many cells, then your occlusion efficiency will take a hit as well. So this might be a good way to do it while you are iterating on your game, and once you are more satisfied with how your level looks and you are coming closer and less changes happen, you could go for a much higher detail bake, go back to the volume, turn the visualization on, make sure you are close within the bounds, and then maybe do something like that, which already would take much longer, but yeah, it will definitely be worth it. And if you now do the merge sampling, it will also be not taking into account too much renderers that are not relevant, because they are already closer to each other as well. I would definitely suggest to just play around with all these settings. The merge downsampling is definitely a very powerful tool that might take a bit longer to bake, because it needs to go through all the cells and merge them, but you will definitely have a very nice bake at the end, and there's no performance implication at all. There's a single lookup that needs to be done, and that's it. And that lookup only happens when you swap over to a next cell. So if you stay in the same cell, it wouldn't even have any performance cost at all. I really hope this very short introduction made it clear how to use the asset, what you should take into consideration for your bakes, and how you can debug some of the problems that you might encounter. And if you are getting stuck, definitely try to, yeah, just get in touch with me, and I will also try to help you. Thank you very much. See you soon.